Thanks, everybody. I just want to take this in for a minute. It's the first time I've ever had this angle view of people associated with basketball. So I only took this stage to be able to do that. Usually it's this view, but today it's this one. So I needed to see what that was like. So it's what the rest of you have been experiencing your whole life. Hey, so I want to show you this picture right here. And this is an old picture. It was actually taken on something called film. And this was back in like 1996 in South America somewhere. And this is a group, a team, if you will, that I used to be a part of. And when I look at this picture, like it evokes a deep emotion in me. You know, even the fact that it's hard to tell as a slide, but if you look at the picture up close, it's even a little bit blurry, you know, which kind of adds to the nostalgic effect of remembering what this team was all about. But this is what I would consider to be a high-performing team. Now, it's a little hard to relate to if you weren't there, but I was stationed in Panama as a brand new infantry lieutenant, and the United States Army South Command, short would be called USARSO. I don't know, that's why Army did that with everything, but United States Army South, of all of the units that were in Panama and a part of that command, they were looking for a small unit, like a platoon-size unit, that they could send down to South America and be a part of a Chilean mountaineering regiment for a couple of weeks. This was a big deal. This was like building relationships between nations. So the Chileans, you know, they were going to send their best platoon up to us, and we were going to send like our best platoon down to them. And in the process of trying to figure out who we were going to send, they actually did like a competition. So it got down to about 8 different units. We competed, you know, did all these military skills and live fire exercises and things to figure out who they were going to send. And my platoon actually like won and got selected. And so we were pretty stoked. I'm going to say this like not in a bragging way, but this was a great team. Like they sent us because we were the best. And if you have ever been a part of a team like that, like I want you to think, what team have you been associated with? Either played on, been a part of, coached, led, anything. Think about a team that you've led that you would say like, this was one of the best teams that I've ever been on. That was this group of guys. I mean, we worked hard together. There were a lot of nights in the jungle in Panama, you know, where it was like complete dark and we're wearing night vision goggles and everybody's tired and we're carrying heavy loads and we're trying to like move to an objective to conduct a raid. And there, in those moments, you know, it's just dark outside and you can look around and go, like everybody back on post right now, Fort Clayton, Howard Air Force Base, they're in bed, they're asleep. There might be that one random guy that's like outside walking his dog in the middle of the night, but everybody else is pretty much like in bed and asleep. And here we are out here sweating and working hard and getting this done. And there's nobody that can ever take that time away from you. And I'm sure some of you have spent time on a basketball court or in a gym, and you've been there at weird hours, and you're thinking, I'm the only one that's putting in this kind of time. But that's what this team was all about. And we anticipated what each other was going to do. We knew how each other like would think about something or how to solve a problem. And when they sent us to Chile, they did something that was just like completely, the Chileans, it's like, they wanted to pull out their best stuff to show us, right? They're trying to impress the Americans. And so the Chilean military, they said, hey, we're going to do a live fire exercise on this farmhouse. It's in the Andes Mountains. And we're going to walk like a bunch of kilometers, you know, during the night. And then the next morning, we're going to shoot rockets and drop mortars and, you know, use explosives to blow it up and do all this kind of stuff. And it's like, that's like high risk training right there when you're talking about all those things happening at one time. And yet they allowed us to do it. Like my command allowed us to do that because they knew we had been that well trained and we were ready, you know? And so I want you to kind of get that in your mind is like, what does it take to be a part of that team? Like think about your own experience. Like there's just things that like, just like I'm up here now, I feel very inadequate trying to explain to you, this is how good that team was. Like this is really what was going on behind the scenes. And if you've been a part of a high performing team, you've experienced the same thing. Like you people that aren't on that team, they just won't get it. They just won't get it. And so I don't think I would have to do a whole lot of work in this room to try to convince anybody that teams outperform individuals, right? That's just like a natural thing. Like we inherently believe that teams outperform individuals. And so with the team that I was a part of, I would love to go back and say, oh yeah, I did this. Let me show you the playbook. Like, this is the process that we followed, and we started by doing this, and then we went to this activity, and then we had everybody do this. And it's like, the reality is, like, I didn't do any of that. I had some really great non-commissioned officers that were a part of this unit, and those guys did all the heavy lifting when it came to building a team. And frankly, I think we also got a little bit lucky. We had the right mix. We had the right challenge in front of us. We had a compelling performance challenge that we could all kind of latch onto. We had the right group of soldiers that were in that mix. I mean, a lot of things feel like they had to come together in order to create that environment. The only thing that I did is I was smart enough to know that I was not the smartest person out there, and I would listen to my non-commissioned officers and follow like what they were saying that we needed to do. Like, that was my role in that team, is basically don't screw it up. And we certainly like had a tremendous time. And I would think that the guys that were a part of this unit would still look back today and say, hey, that's a pretty special deal. But the belief is if teams really outperform individuals, and the high performance teams are the ones that are really special, then it kind of puts you in the space of thinking, like, is there a way that I can replicate those high performing teams? Like, is there a roadmap that I can follow? And it turns out there is. And that's what I'm going to share today, is I'm going to give you the roadmap on what the smartest people thinking about this, or what I think are some of the smartest people thinking about this, say are the process to do that. So if you're the kind of person that takes notes, you can tell like how high tech this presentation is going to be, because I brought magic markers. I actually brought my own magic markers. Now, Nations of Coaches was kind enough to present them. They brought a brand new pack up here that hadn't even been opened. I brought this pack because they're scented. This one's strawberry, I think. It's pretty amazing. We're going to use that one. I don't know what black is. I mean, like, what smell would that be? Who knows? I'm scared to pull the brown one out, so we're going to leave it in the box. Okay. So I'm going to give you this roadmap, and then we're going to talk about kind of the process that a team goes through. And the belief is, if you know the map and you understand the process, then in your own context, like, everybody has their own context that they're going to go back to and lead and be responsible for. Like, in your own context, you'll be able to go back and apply this stuff and build high-performing teams, back in your own setting. And so I would love to tell you that I created this. I didn't. There were a couple of really smart researchers back in the early 90s, like 1993, they published this book called The Wisdom of Teams. And in The Wisdom of Teams, they actually outlined this is the process that almost every team goes through. And they looked at all kinds of teams. They looked at military and law enforcement. They looked at sports teams. And they also looked at a lot of like business teams, like office settings and things like that, and tried to determine, like, are there characteristics that are the same? And it was part of that research that helped them build this map. And I'm going to share it today, but I'm going to give a little bit of an additional spin on it. So let me show you. This is how it goes. So we'll jump into the map here. This is really high tech. So, and by the way, I'm going to draw a graph here. My degree is in literature. And so this is a graph. A graph has these two axes. I don't even know axes. I don't even know what you'd say for two axes. It's an axis, but twice. And I don't know which one is which. I know one of these is X and one is Y. So just roll with it. I'm going to call this one X. It doesn't really matter. And this one Y. If I got those wrong, then you can take a picture of it and send it to Chick-fil-A and they'll think it's funny. On this side of the graph, I'm going to call this side, I'm just going to abbreviate here, but I'm going to call this side's performance. And performance can be anything, right? It's like whatever the outcome is that you're after. It could be performance, wins, outcomes, productivity, like any measure that you would want to throw out there. But that's basically how well is the team performing. And on this axis down here, I'm going to put the word time, because time is certainly a component. Like, it takes some measure of time that you have to move through in order to develop this team. Now, over time, what I have realized is a better word down here might be the word maturity. And I like maturity instead of time because you can help people mature faster than they would normally mature on their own, like just left to their own device. It's like, so the idea that you can help move along the maturation process of a team and how they work together and how effective they are together. I like that idea because it does paint the picture that you can compress time a little bit, right, and get more out of it. Because my guess is you guys have limited amounts of time in the teams that you're building, right? If you had unlimited time, we'd have some like totally amazing teams, and you guys are working like year after year, starting the same process over. And so that's why I like maturity. So the movement through this is pretty simple. It's just a J curve. So this is a little bit of what the team process looks like. And there's different places on this curve that you can wind up at any given moment. And so to start out, so this is Katzenbach and Smith. They did the wisdom of teams. And basically what they said was, right here, when any group starts, this is what you would call a work group. They won't even let you use the name team on this. This is a work group. And you could describe a work group as their performance. You could describe it as 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. Pretty good math there. It's just basically the sum of the individual parts or the sum of the individual efforts is what a work group is, right? You see a lot of teams do this, right? They're trying to recruit. They're trying to get the best players that they can, but a lot of teams, that's as far as they get, is they'll recruit the right ones, but then that team is only the sum of the individual players that are on it and doesn't really get the full effect of a team. Down here, they would call this area that the group's moving through, they would call this a pseudo team. And pseudo team just basically means it's like, well, they're trying to be a team, but they're not really there yet. And so pseudo team, you might say, you could describe the outcome or the performance as 1 + 1 + 1 = 2. This is where a lot of teams get stuck because they had some really great individuals on the team here, and they were doing some really great things. And then to go through this team process, they actually have a dip in their performance, productivity, output, whatever this is. Like they feel the pains of what it is to work together. So the tendency for a lot of places, whether it's in business or whether it's in athletics, is they'll want to just revert right back to where they were here. Hey, we were getting better results when we went back to this. And so they lose heart, they turn around, they don't continue with the journey, and they go back to where they were. There is a place where if you get over here and you've pushed through enough, if you could, I didn't actually draw that really super well, but if you were to draw a line across here, you would say, well, that's about back to the same performance. They would actually call this a potential team is the word that they would use. I can't spell potential. Just read it phonetically and you'll have it right. Whatever I write up here, just read phonetically and we're all good. The performance on this, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. So you're kind of back to even ground on this, but you've got some of the team stuff that's going. If you continue to push through this and you get to a good space, that's what you would have right here. And this is what they would call a real team. The idea behind this or the description might be 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. So now this is where the magic starts to happen, because right here, you're starting to get more performance out of that team than just the sum of the individual parts, right? Like just the individual skills and everything that they contribute as a team or as a group, you start to get more out of this. And so this is where you're getting a little bit of synergy because you're getting more out of it than the sum of the individual, people and effort that you're putting into it. There is a place where unicorns live, and it's called the high-performing team, and that's the one that you might put up here. And this is, I'll just abbreviate and write HPT for high-performing team, and you might describe their output or performance as 1 + 1 + 1 could equal 10 plus. It's just that the results or the performance far exceeds anything that like individual contributions would actually do to get them there. So this is Katzenbach and Smith, and here's what's interesting. Like if you want to push through this, there's a couple of different areas to think about. So if you think about this line right here, this is kind of your mean performance line. If you look below this, they say in order to move through this really difficult part here, like this valley of despair, if you will, like I've heard it referred to as that, the valley of despair. But in order to move through this, they would say what you need to work on is skills. And this is interesting because these are secular researchers that have like looked at all the research, looked at all the data. But what they determined was in the handful of teams that they looked at that performed at this level where they would have described it as a high-performing team, they said the differentiator between here and here came down to one thing, and this is the word that the secular researchers used. They actually used the word love. So if you want to move the team through this is where I think our minds naturally gravitate to, right? If we're coaches or if we're leaders, we tend to think about increasing like individual skills, and then we also think about increasing group skills. So in a business setting, a group skill might be like how you resolve conflict or how the team makes decisions together or how we prioritize work. Those are all skills that a group of people can learn how to do together. And then certainly there's individual skills associated with the job, but that's basically a lot of times where we end up focusing is this. And so we just end up bumping back and forth between this area right here. The teams that really turn this on is because this was the investment that they made in each other, is this whole idea of love. Now, I thought that was fascinating coming from secular researchers. There's another guy, another research guy, and I'm sorry to give you all this, this is like the theory right behind it. What's interesting is if you have a picture of this team in your mind, like kind of how you're thinking about it, figure out which color I'm going to do here. Yeah, if you have a picture of this in your mind, it's like the team that you've been a part of. My guess is you could go back and think about your team and the process that you guys went through, and you could kind of break this down. But there's another layer that I'm going to put on this, and it's actually from a different researcher, a guy named Bruce Tuckman, and I think he was a professor at Yale, and back in the 1960s, like around 1965, he actually published what was called the stage theory model of group dynamics. And I'm almost certain that everybody in here is familiar with this, or you've at least heard of it, but it's the whole like form, storm, norm, and perform, if you guys have heard that, right? That was Tuckman's work. And so what's interesting is this, you kind of could overlay that right on this graph. This right here, this would be where your team is starting to form, right? You get everybody together, you know how it is. You get everybody in the room and they're kind of sizing each other up, right? They're figuring out like who's going to get playing time. They're figuring out like who their competition is. They're maybe unclear on another person's motives, right? Not sure if they can trust them or not sure what their level of commitment is. But this whole idea of form, you could pretty much do like this. Then in this section right here, this valley of despair, you might call this the storm section. So form, then you're going to storm, because right here, we're trying to answer all those questions. Do I trust my teammate? Do they have my best interest in mind, or are they just looking out for themselves? What's their level of commitment to the team? What's my level of commitment to the team? How are we doing on the group skills that I just talked about that we need to work on? Like all of those kind of things come into this. And the way that you dig out of this curve or this valley of despair is by creating what they would have called as normative behaviors. So form, storm, norm. Normative behaviors are the ones that we agree on. Sometimes we refer to that as culture. I think they're similar, in some ways even the same, but a culture is just like, hey, this is what we're going to do. I heard one of the coaches up here earlier on stage talking about, hey, that's not the behavior that we do on this team. You know, it's like that would be an example of a normative process or a normative behavior, normative agreement that's been created. So form, storm, norm, and then of course the last one is perform. So in order to hit this rare air up here, this is what Tuckman would have said would have been kind of that final stage back in the 1960s. So I think it's really interesting. Tuckman did come back later on, and I don't remember how many years later this was, but another researcher had joined him at this point. They were kind of going back and forth with this, and they did add a final stage to this process, and they actually came back with one, and I'm just going to write it up here, but it's this whole idea of adjourn. So if you think about teams, and even teams that we work with, they don't go on forever. And so at some point, that team, currently as it is, in whatever form, like that team is going to end. It's going to adjourn. Even if it's like, you lose 3 players and you pick up 3 new players. It's like the old team as you knew it just adjourned, and there's a new team that's now starting. And so to whatever degree you lost people, there is an adjournment, and you're going to slide back down this curve somewhere. How far, a lot of it depends on how well you do this stuff right here, right? Between the skills and the normative behaviors, and then how much you encourage love within that group. So I'm getting some nods. A little hard to read the room, but I'm gonna go like one step further, and I'm gonna say, I'm gonna kind of go at it like this. If this is a repeatable pattern, like if this is something that we can say, hey, we think we can replicate this, or there's the possibility to do that, and I'm looking at this roadmap and I'm going, okay, like this when I saw this for the first time, this is how I looked at it. I was like, okay, I've been on some good teams. I look at this and I go, I think that's right. Like I would say it matches, what our team did. This the team that I put up there on the picture. This totally matches like what we went through as a group. It didn't happen overnight. It took time. It took investment. But eventually we got to where we like really trusted one another. Our level of commitment to one another was high. And we certainly didn't use this word back then, but I would say that there was probably evidence that we even loved each other. And so if this is the case, and I am now a leader of a team or a coach of a team, I'm going to say that there's certain responsibilities that we would have. And so if you said, hey, I want to bring my best leadership to bear, whatever team I'm leading, whatever team I'm responsible for, and even if it's not, like I'm not even just talking like you got to be the head coach. You can have any role. Your team might be you and one other person. Your team might be 3 people. It might be an area of the athletic program that you're responsible for, or in my case, it may be an area of the business that I'm responsible for. But whatever that is, like you've got an opportunity to bring your best leadership to bear in order to help this form. And so as we do this, there's 4 responsibilities that I think if you'll fulfill these 4 responsibilities, then you're going to have the greatest likelihood of bringing great leadership to this. And so the first responsibility that I would say is to make certain that your purpose, goals, and approach are relevant and meaningful. So I know that's kind of a mouthful, but first responsibility is you got to look at what you're doing and make sure that your purpose, your goals, and approach are meaningful and relevant. The first one, and I heard mention of this too, it's amazing how God kind of brings this stuff together, right? It's like there was some level of like silos in that we all brought different content to this, and yet a lot of the content ends up fitting together. I think God ordained a lot of that. I think a lot of it's just truth. It's His truth, and so He's showing us how it fits together. But if you think about this, you really have to answer a couple of additional questions with this. So as you go back today, it's like part of what I'm hoping is either in your table discussions or as you're leaving out of here today and you're thinking about, okay, we heard all this stuff. Now, what are we going to apply? Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to go back and do differently as a result of like stuff that you hear today? And I would say that one of the ones that I would encourage us all to do is to really think about like, what is your why? Like, what is your personal why? Like, if you don't wake up every day with clarity on your personal why about why you're doing what you're doing, then it's really hard to do anything else effectively if your personal why isn't clear. So to me, that's part of that whole idea of making certain that your purpose, goals, and approach, your why is completely wrapped up in that as the leader of whatever size team you end up being responsible for. The other thing I would throw out there too, and we see this some at work, is in work settings, in like business settings, a lot of times you end up being on multiple teams, right? So like I think about the teams that I'm on. I have a team that I lead, and it's got, there's 8 of us on that team, and so that's one I'm responsible for, but I'm also on what we call a leadership team. Maybe team is even a misnomer, but the leadership team where it's me and my boss and my counterpart on that leads a different team. And then I think about like teams of, other like workflow teams that I end up being a part of. And so one of the questions that you have to answer is, which is your most important team? Now, you might look at that, and on the surface, you go, if I say what's the most important team, and I'm talking to a group of basketball coaches, you might well go, well, duh. I mean, it's the basketball team, right? It's the players on that team. But the reality is, it may actually be the group of coaches that lead that team may be where the greatest investment needs to happen right here. Like if that group of people is super effective, then you have better opportunity of making the athletic sports team more effective because they're all working together and in unison and are unified and aligned in what they're doing. And so what's your why and who is your most important team, or what's your most important team are ones that I would say to consider with that responsibility. The second responsibility would be to foster trust and commitment among that team. So foster trust and commitment. Now I say that, a lot of you, it's like, I know this whole thing, it's like when I hear it, it's like, yeah, this is pretty obvious. And yet as obvious as it is, it's like we just forget to like keep the main thing. And so that's a little bit what we're doing here. But if you say foster trust and commitment, the two things that come to mind here is like a team that completely trusts each other. Like I would use the word careless. And I don't mean careless in a negligent way. I mean careless in that like they can freely be who they are, and there's complete trust that we are for each other and that we are committed to each other. Like careless is what I do with my family. Like when I'm home with my family, I am careless because I know that they will love me unconditionally. And they know that I'll love them unconditionally and that I'm completely for them. And so careless in that regard. And so part of that we heard earlier, somebody talked about vulnerability, like how vulnerable can you be? And my question to that is like, well, how much trust do you want to have? Because that's really what it comes down to. And you don't go in like right out of the gate and go, oh, I grew up in an abusive home and, my dad used to hit me and all this. Like you don't really start there in these scenarios. But what happens is if you create the right settings and that you're talking about things other than the work that's at hand, but you're getting to know each other, there ends up being these like conversations where it's like increasing, reciprocating levels of trust. It's like the conversations go further, they get a little deeper, the conversations get a little more meaningful. It's like, it's that level of trust that you build over time. And that's why I would say that like it actually takes time to do this, but the maturity part comes in when you can compress that timeline by creating the atmosphere and the settings for players or for your team to be able to do that. That's why maturity comes in, is because I do think it allows you to shorten that timeline a little bit if you're intentional. We had a member of our team that really helped us get here. This came to mind and I was like, I wasn't going to talk about it because he's actually here today. He's sitting in the back, but I'm going to talk about it now. So Brian Corbett, another Chick-fil-A guy we were traveling together this week in Nashville, and so we both came to this event. But we were doing like Zoom calls. I don't know if anybody's been on any Zoom calls this year, but we were doing Zoom calls at work, and we go to end one of the calls, and as we're wrapping up, and this is just our team, but as we're going to like wrap up this Zoom call, Brian is closing out the call, and he says, "I love you." And he doesn't say like, now I did that one time. I was driving out to Augusta with my boss, I was talking to my boss on the phone driving to Augusta because that was a Chick-fil-A market that I worked with. And so I'm just driving out there, and we're like driving along and I'm talking to my boss on the phone and, it's just somebody that's familiar to you. And I go to hang up and almost instinctively, as if I had been talking to my wife, I hung up saying, "I love you." And then it's one of those things of like, you just hung up. The interstate's really boring between Atlanta and Augusta, and your mind will play tricks on you, right? It starts going like, did I really just say that? And then you're like, well, maybe Andy didn't hear me, like maybe Andy was just, he had already hung, like maybe the phone had actually disconnected before those words came across the receiver, "I love you." But in this case, Brian did it intentionally. Like he said to the team, "I love you." And, and so this is the other thing that makes us uncomfortable, right? It's like a lot of us in here, it's really hard to say to somebody that's not your spouse or your child or your family member, like a parent or something. I mean, it's got to be like family to say, "I love you," and just let it end there. Because if I'm saying to another guy right here, if I just say, "Hey, I love you," like I'm more likely to be, it's a little safer for me to go, "Hey, love you, man," Like I can say, love you, man. That's a lot easier. Hey, love you guys. Like I can do that. I can say, love you guys. And that's a little safer, right? Because it's a little more generic and, takes the edge off a little bit. But I'm actually in favor. Like I think if this is where you're headed and you're trying to have a high performance team, it's kind of like you got to get over yourself and be willing to be a little vulnerable. And so Brian did that for the team. I mean, he said, I love you. And it's kind of like we all paused. Like what's going to happen next, like we were waiting. And then a couple of guys chimed in and it was like one guy on our team, he responded back, said, hey, love you guys. But for him, that was the step, right? He's trying to get closer, reciprocating levels of trust, like he's trying to get there. And so then it kind of became, actually it's funny because we actually tried to turn it into a little bit of a team norm. So when we end calls now, we'll try to end calls and say, hey, love you, or I love you, or love you guys. Or one of my teammates just had a baby. I was on FaceTime with him out there, hadn't seen the baby yet. So he's like new dad. He's like, he was like Mr. Tough Guy, and now he's had this baby girl and he's like Mr. Big and Fluffy. You know what I mean? He's just like gotten soft on us like overnight, just like that. But we're on the call, and to be able to like look at him on FaceTime and say, hey, I love you. Like we're here for you if you need us. Like that means a lot. And so I would just say as you're thinking about how to foster trust and commitment to the team, the commitment comes in really strong when you love somebody, you're committed to them. And when somebody knows that they're loved, they're a lot more likely to be committed to you or to be committed to the team. And so that's why I think it's so important. Like somebody, like there's a lot of people I might quit on, but I don't quit on people that love me. And people that love me don't quit on me. And so that's why that commitment comes in. Is I just think it's something that you gotta be willing to talk about and be willing to foster in your teams. All right, so first responsibility was about making sure that your purpose, goals, and approach are meaningful and relevant. Second responsibility was to foster trust and commitment. So the third responsibility is to strengthen the mix and level of skills in your team. Strengthen the mix and level of skills in your team. If you hear that on the surface, it might seem that might be a little bit of like an X's and O's question, or I think it was like Coach Drew that was up here earlier talking about, if you got Shaq, you adapt to them, or if you got this player, you adapt to that player, like whatever their skills are that they bring. But I would say go like one step further than that and think about the team that supports the athletes and like what are the skills that you have there and what are the skills that you still need in that team that supports athletes. So think about increasing the skill level and also think about diversifying the skill mix that's in that group. Now, a lot of times at work, what we end up doing is we kind of go down this path of like, it becomes like a budget and a head count game, right? Like you got to go compete with other departments to get head count, and we need another person that can do this and that kind of thing. And what I've learned over time is like your teams can be a lot more organic than that. So if I'm at a college or university, there's a lot of skills represented on that piece of property, and so it may be that I got to go outside of an assigned head count. I might have to go outside of a certain budget. I don't mean go above the budget. I just mean like not be confined by the budget or head count like we normally allow ourselves to be confined, but say, just go find those people that we need to help. Because a lot of times if you come to somebody and say, hey man, we know you've got this unique skill set, would you be willing to help us do this? Like a lot of times that person's going to jump in and do that. And so be willing to think about, but all of this takes time because you have to actually take a look at it, or you and your team need to take a look at it and say, what skills do we have and what skills do we still need? And then don't let yourself be confined to the normal stuff of head count, budget, whatever that you would normally look at and consider. So strengthen the mix and level of skills is the third responsibility. And then the fourth responsibility is to create opportunities for others. Create opportunities for others. That's why when they introduced me and said, hey, part of what I like to do is I like to help people, get what they want, It's like the whole idea of like creating opportunities for others is really, it's a mindset to how you approach the team that you're with. And so one thing is this: when Bruce Tuckman came back and added adjourn as like a fifth stage to that stage theory model, I think there's something to that, because how you adjourn determines how easy it is to go through this process and build the next team, right? If you adjourn really well, and there's a system to it, there's a process to it, people are recognized, there's like proper closure to relationships, you're launching somebody to a better opportunity, the whole team can be a part of that, then the people that are left behind, they know this process and they're a lot more motivated to like get through this more quickly. And so when you adjourn well, you actually create the conditions and the atmosphere. It's like you're giving yourself a head start on the next team because of how you adjourn and how you end that team. And so I don't know what your processes are. I know when I played like Little League sports, we had a banquet at the end of the year. Anybody have a banquet in their past? I did. I know I didn't play basketball. I think we agreed on that with a stature comment earlier, but I got some banquet trophies. Probably my mom's probably still got them at her house. I don't have them anymore, but she's probably got them like all boxed up, Anyway, so create opportunities for others. Another thing with this that I would say is like if you're, especially if you're a coach that's like responsible for leading people, I want you to think about people that you bring into your team. Have a mindset of launch versus harvest, right? Because so many times our tendency is, let's go find the person that's best at doing this, and then let's harvest everything that person can bring to the team and exploit it for this team. And a lot of times if you do that, all you're doing is using this person up, and there's really no motivation behind that. And like once they're used up, they're done and there's nothing you can do. But if you think in a mentality of like launching somebody, it's like that they're coming to your program and your program is the launch pad. And you're going to get the benefit of them being a part of your team for the season that they're a part of your team. But ultimately, your goal is not to keep them there. Your goal is to help them launch to whatever that next career is. Another way that you could think about this is I've even heard people say, like, I'm trying to remember, this has been years ago now, but I heard a speaker say, you want to hire people that are smarter than you. And so if you think about that, that's really true, right? Like if I'm a coach and I can find like I'll just pick on Scott Drew because he was here, but like if I could find the young Scott Drew and get him to add to my team during those years before he gets his own opportunity, then I'm going to get some really great contribution and some really great growth for the team. But I know that this is not the stopping point for him. He's going to go on to do things way bigger than what I'm going to go on to do. And so but I'm okay with that. It's like there's a certain humility that's like, hey, my ego doesn't have to get in the way. I want the best people, but I also know this is a launch pad for them and they're going to go somewhere, further down the road in the future. And so just try to have a mindset of people that become part of your team, people that you're responsible for. Think launch versus harvest, because that's really about helping them be better, and it's about creating opportunities for others. So, all right, so I did all that. I'm 11 and a half minutes left. I'm going to do some Q&A. So this is the part I really like because I can, this is where it gets real and we'll get people to throw out some real questions. And I do not pretend to have all the answers. Some things I'll answer if I've had an experience that I think fits, and some things I'm going to be like, I don't know, does anybody else in the room have an idea on this? But we'll see how it goes. So would love to open it up. This is where and when I say conversation, you can ask questions, you can push back on this, you can disagree, we can debate it. It's whatever you want to do. I want to know what's on your mind, what you're thinking about, what comes to mind based on what we've talked about so far.
I just have a really quick one. Did your boss say love you back? You didn't tell us that.
Did what now?
Did your boss say love you back?
No, he didn't, because it hung up, man. It was like, he may have, but if it did, it cut off before I heard it. So he lives here in Nashville now. He's retired, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm a little afraid to run into him because I don't want him going, hey, you remember that? But it's all good. Anybody? Questions, thoughts, comments?
Dominic Lombardi, how have you seen shared adversity speed up the time frame for that?
Shared adversity is it can be really good. It can be really dangerous. So I think adversity of any kind tends to be volatile, right? The way I would describe it is like it's like a catalyst. You know, a catalyst is like a catalyst by definition is like a small amount of something that gets added to something else, and its presence causes the something else to change or go through some kind of process. And in certain cases, like that is how you could make like positive change, and in other cases, like that's how you make dynamite. You know, and so you don't want the adversity to be destructive. So the thing is, like I think a leader's responsibility in those settings is if anybody's ever driven like a boat before. You know, like the boat throttle just makes a lot more sense to me, right? Gas pedal, it's going up and down a lot, but a boat throttle, you kind of set it, you know where the sweet spot is and kind of hang on. Sometimes if you're going fast in the boat starts going really fast and starts shaking, and so you're able to throttle back just a little bit. I think the team and the adversity is the same way. So as the leader, my job is to monitor where the team is, think about the individuals in the group, and know when I need to pull the throttle back. And then sometimes, like, hey, we're running pretty smooth. Let's push the throttle forward a little bit. That'll ramp up the intensity, the focus, maybe even the adversity a little bit. But you're monitoring it because you're making sure that it doesn't destroy the boat. But you do want to push it so that you can, like, again, shrink that timeline or, you know, increase the maturity kind of thing. What else? Any other questions? There's one, I see a hand in the back. Yes.
Talk a little bit about how Chick-fil-A, and I've heard this several years ago, will sometimes, you know, change your teams a little bit to bring you back down, you know, and how that can be effective to, you know, propel you back up to performance.
Okay, it's been a while since I changed teams, so I had to think about that a little bit. I think that, you know, one of the things that, I don't know if this directly answers what you're asking about, but anytime that you change individuals, so like the team I'm on right now, there were 6 of us on the team, and we lost one teammate. Pretty pivotal teammate, but we lost a teammate. He was like our most tenured guy. We lost him. And when I say lost him, he just went to a different team, right? So he's contributing. Actually, and so we lost him to a different team, but we gained 3 new people. And so the question is, like, when that happens, it's like, where does that happen? And so right now, honestly, I don't, and Brian's back there, he's on the team. I don't know where he would describe it. I think our team is like right here, right now, because we were at least like real team or better, I would think, because of where we were, like to say I love you on a call. I mean, we were doing really great stuff and working really well together. But when we lost that teammate and we gained 3 new ones, we've just changed a big percentage of the players, so to speak. And so I think we drug back down. I think we're right here. So you've got the new teammates that have come on. They're all great in their own right, and they have their own really good Chick-fil-A experience, but we haven't had those shared experiences as a team yet. And so there's a little bit of like we're still trying to figure each other out. And so with COVID, it's been especially hard because we spent a lot of Zoom time together, but we haven't spent a lot of road time together. And typically that's where we do the best work is, you know, go back to the jungle example that I shared earlier. When you are out in the dark in the jungle in the middle of the night, night after night after night with the same group of people, like you get to be close to that group of people. And because of COVID, and I'm not literally, but our version of that is to travel and to be in Chick-fil-A restaurants together. Because of COVID, we haven't done that. And so honestly, we're stalling right now a little bit. Like we're kind of stuck in this area right here. This conference, this summit is encouraging because it's like, hey, we're a group of people and we're all together, like hopefully post-COVID. And so I think the next thing that's going to have to happen with the team is we're going to have to do some work about figuring out how to norm and spend some time together, you know, to push that equation. And so I'm optimistic that we can get back. But here's another thing that Katzenbach and Smith said too about teams. They said in work settings and like business settings, Most people that work in a teams-based environment for their entire career, let's say it's a 30-year career, they might one time experience a high-performing team. So a 30-year career, one time a high-performing team. I think it's because they just hang out right here. And I think every time they try to do it, they go back and forth between here, and they don't have a leader that understands, like, hey, there is actually an intentional roadmap that we can follow, and to know I've got to monitor the team and do the things that push them through to the other side of the curve. But they would say, like, one time if you're lucky. And that's why I get passionate about this, because if you've ever been on a really great team, like, you want other people to have that same experience, right? Like, you want them to be able to experience what you experienced, and it's a special thing that, like, you carry with you for the rest of your life. And so with this, it's like, that's why we create the roadmap and we say, hey, do your best to follow this. It still doesn't guarantee success, but it really increases the odds and the likelihood of success because you're being intentional about the decisions that you're making. So what else? Other questions? I see a hand in the back there. Or questions, thoughts? And again, I'm wide open to debate. Like, we hadn't had a lot of debate in here today, so I'm okay with, like, mixing it up.
Scott, Bubba Smith here. Talk maybe, and again, relating this to our athletic specific journey. All right, it's just hit recruiting on the head. And because I heard you speak, I think last time we were at Chick-fil-A. For you guys at Chick-fil-A, you guys spend an insane amount of time evaluating the people that you bring to your teams. So when you get them there, there's still things you got to work through, and you're seeing your teams changing on that curve. Maybe just talk about that evaluation process. So for us as coaches, that's recruiting and evaluating the pieces that we're asking to come be a part of our team. Maybe speak to that a little bit because again, I don't think people here probably know that the amount of time that you guys put into. I think one of the guys that spoke a number of years ago had been interviewed, 30 times? I mean, just 30 or 40 times with the Chick-fil-A before they said, all right, you're going to come be a part of our group. But, you know, it's insane, but at the same time, it makes sense why your organization functions so well.
Yeah. I think one of the, I won't even call it a secret to success. It's just one thing that we've decided that we're willing to invest the time and energy on is to be really specific about the criteria that we're looking for, especially as it pertains to our franchisees. And so we do have the luxury. It's like we're not up against an athletic season schedule. So we've got the luxury, but we spend a lot of time really looking at who are our best performers and what are the attributes that they bring to the table. And it's not all business attributes. You know, sometimes you need attributes like this person can actually work well with other franchisees. Like you can't just be the Lone Ranger and do great on your own. You've actually got to be able to work well with others. And so we do spend a lot of time, like our founder, Truett Cathy, the only analogy that he ever compared the franchisee relationship to was marriage. And his idea was we're going to spend a lot of time getting to know each other, but once we commit to each other in this franchise agreement, like we're going to be together forever, you know, unless something like really bad happens. And occasionally really bad stuff does happen. But that's why, like, you know, the retention rate's like 95% or greater on the franchisees that we do pull in. So yeah, where you have time, I would say that's important. If I'm in an athletic setting, I would probably say let's spend the time thinking about who are the best players that we've had in the past, what attributes did they bring to the table, and what attributes are we looking for? I have no leg to stand on to say this other than to say the theory behind this. You know, this is the 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. Well, nobody here is looking for ones in your recruits, right? You're looking for 10s in your recruits. And so, you know, some are going to be 8s and some are going to be 9s and some are going to be 10s. But sometimes you might argue that maybe an 8 that you can trust and that has really good commitment to the team because of this belief that ultimately they can get to here, that 8 might actually perform at a higher level because of the trust and commitment. And so I think that's the thing that you got to wrestle with, but that's a little contrarian, right? Because everybody's looking for, I mean, think about the NFL, right? It's like you go to this combine thing and it's all about measurement. You know, how high can you jump? How fast can you run? How big are you? You know, all those kind of things come into play. But I do believe that sometimes you can have a slightly less talented person that has the commitment and the trust factor, and that team will go a lot further. So I don't know if that answered that, but any other questions about, yes?
What are some examples that you use to make certain the purpose, goals, and approach are relevant? Like, I know that's a goal, but how do you get there? And the reason I asked that, when we went to Chick-fil-A a couple of years
Yep.
ago, and I asked 3 different people, I said, what's your mission statement?
This is at Chick-fil-A?
At Chick-fil-A.
Oh, that's dangerous, man. What'd you find out?
And all 3 of them gave the same exact answer. And
Oh.
it was great. It was great, right? But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, the reason I go with that is, like a lot of business companies, a lot of teams have what they call core values.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but does everybody understand those core values? Do you live those core values, right?
Yep.
So up there, you said make certain your purpose and goals and approach are relevant. So I'm just curious, like that was really impressive. So, like, for example, what does make certain mean to you? Like, what do you do to get that point across to everybody?
Yeah. Man, that's a good question. One of the things I've heard, so Truett was our founder. Truett's oldest son, Dan, became CEO and president. Truett passed away. Dan is now in a role, I would almost describe his role now more as ownership than like president or leading the company day to day. Like, he doesn't actually have the title president anymore. But one of the things that Dan is pretty good at is casting vision. And I'm going to mess this up, but he basically says, date the methods, marry the mission. So your mission is still the mission, but your methods may need to change over time. And so specific to what each of us do, I think one thing is you got to allow yourself the time and space to reflect and evaluate with people that you trust and people that are good to help you speak into it. Tommy was telling me a little while ago, even about Nations of Coaches. He's got people that aren't on staff with Nations of Coaches, but he'll partner with them because they'll speak into the business, give them fresh perspective. It's like, I don't think that changes Tommy's mission at all, or Nations of Coaches' mission, but it might lend some light into there might be other methods that we need to consider that are maybe more effective than what we used to do. And so I think with Chick-fil-A, that's it. It's like I think we're constantly in sort of an evaluation process. We go through a planning process every year, try to take a step back and go, what are we doing? We've actually changed mission statements. I mean, I've been 20 years now with Chick-fil-A. We've changed mission statements 3 times. The corporate purpose has not changed at all, but the mission statement has changed 3 times. And now, like, it's even different now. It's like our mission now is to be the most caring company.
So that would be the same thing as your purpose. Your mission statement and your purpose, is that the same thing?
I would say that for us, the purpose is different. The purpose is more like who we are, and the mission statement is more what are we doing. And so right now what we're doing is we're trying to be the most caring company. And that's really squishy. It's like, how does a restaurant company become the most caring company? We don't know the answer to it, actually. Like, we're in the process of figuring out, but we've had enough conversation and self-evaluation that we're trying to figure out, like, we believe that we're in a position that we might be able to do that or influence that. So that's good. Any other comments? Or I'll even throw it out if it's this or if it's other, like, Chick-fil-A questions since I'm up here. I mean, we got another minute to...
I got I've heard you a bunch of times, and one of the times you were talking about this, first time we were telling us about one of the 1+1s that was like in the 10s, and that they even went to the leader of that group and wanted to move him up, and he said, you don't want to move me up, you want to move the other guy up.
Yeah.
That was on the team.
That's right.
And I think that's relevant to coaches who have a really good assistant, and to help them move that. The part of love, the biblical understanding of love, is I want the best for that other person.
Yeah.
And could you speak to that, about how that makes them better by hoping good stuff on the guys that are working and the girls that are working for them?
Yeah, I can. And actually, that's good. It's like I tried to not just like regurgitate all of the research, but y'all are asking some of the questions. Actually, for this team right here, another thing on the high-performing teams they said is that the leader is sometimes hard to identify. Somebody said it earlier, like on picking a team captain, right? You said, well, if you got to have a meeting to decide who the captain is, then you don't have a captain, because nobody, that captain, the leader's going to rise up automatically. And I would say the same thing kind of happens. It's like with a high performing team, even the team photo that I put up there, from the military, I would say that team, yes, I was the person that was going to go to jail if something bad happened, because I was on paper to the Army, I was the guy responsible. But there were other leaders. I mentioned the non-commissioned officers. Those are the guys that rose at different times. Different people would contribute leadership to the team, and so that's really how this team operates. At different times, different people are going to be providing leadership based on the needs of the team. Sometimes it's in a different moment. Sometimes it might be a season, right? Like it might be several days or several weeks, but you're going to have different people that are going to contribute. But the point is, like a high-performing team, because it does sort of blend together, it's like everybody feels comfortable bringing their best to bear. And sometimes that's leadership, and sometimes it means that the leader that is the on-paper head of the organization, like they just might be less evident. And they're okay with that because they know that the greater good is helping everybody else be successful, which kind of goes back to this whole idea of the fourth responsibility, which is to create opportunities for others. That's all part of that mix is you're allowing people to bring what they're capable of. So that's good. Any others, and then maybe one more, and we'll wrap up.
I have a question. You have love and skills. So what's the concept of skills?
Yeah. So skills, I would say you almost got to put skills into two categories. There's individual skills, and then there's group or team skills. And so an individual skill would be anything that helps like that individual person, individual contributor do their job better. Like in whatever setting that is. In the military, an individual skill might be how well they can shoot their weapon. Like that would be an individual skill. But a group skill is going to be like in a business setting, a group skill would be something like how we resolve conflict or how we make decisions. You could make the leader could make the decisions. That's kind of a command decision. The leader could get input, but then make the decision. That's kind of a consultative decision. Or the leader could completely just say, hey, we're going to come to consensus. And so everybody's kind of voting to make a decision. Or they could say, hey, I'm not going to make the decision. I'm going to delegate the decision. And so, but those are all group skills that roll up under that.
So can you alleviate skills and still have the maximum outcome performance just with love about the skills?
No, I don't think you can. I think you can if you have love, but less on the skills. It's like you're just going to have a really good group of people to hang out with. I mean, I'm not saying that like too jokingly, but that's what it's going to be. Versus if you have all skills, they might be super proficient, but if they don't have this part, it's like they're only going to go so far. And so that's why it was so interesting, because it's the care is what raises the commitment.
So the question is, why would you even bring somebody in that don't have the skills?
Well, I would say that you wouldn't if it's skills that you need, but like even on the military team that I shared, it's like we all went through a basic training that gave us the basic skills that we needed to be there. But once we get there, we continue to refine those individual skills. So the people that shoot, refine it to where they shoot better. The guy that works the radio, he can operate the radio, but now he's trying to figure out, and this was a big deal back then, it's about 52 miles across the Panama Canal. So you can kind of go ocean to ocean in Panama. If you're kind of generally following the Panama Canal, it's about 52 miles. That was an impossible shot on the radio. But my radio guy, because he worked at it and he continued to work on his individual skills, he got to where he could actually communicate with somebody on a radio on the other end because he built a certain antenna. He understood the wavelength propagation theory. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. Just make it work. Like that was a delegated kind of thing. But he did it because he kept working on individual skills. And so I do think there's like a constant refinement, and probably not that different than players too, right? Your players come to you because they got a certain level of talent. You're going to continue to raise that talent because you're going to do drills that improve their individual skills. But then there is this emotional component to the game that raises the trust and commitment to the team. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I see what you're getting at now. So I realize that. So if this is confusing, it's because basically I'm just saying to this level of performance on the graph, you can move through that by focusing on skills. Once you go past this, you're still using skills and still focused on it. But in order to go from here to here, you got to start thinking about the emotional commitment of that group of people to one another that's going to actually help you hit that high performance. It's kind of the blended part. That's a good question. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear on the graph. It's a graph, man. I'm an English, if it was British literature, I could whip out a mean poem right now. But this was my best as a non-math guy to draw a graph. In fact, when we came here, I started seeing like stenciling on the back. They the chairs and the music stand things they have. It says BBC, and I'm thinking, oh, they're gonna have a good Shakespeare play or something. But then I realized it was Brentwood Baptist Church. I was a little let down, but it's all good. It's all good. Hey, so I just want to say, let me sort of wrap up by saying this, and it's funny. Jimmy Dykes, when he was up here earlier, he started talking about Joshua, and I was like, Joshua was going to be my close. I was like, no. I'm in the back, just in my head, thinking, no, don't go there. But he didn't use the same stuff from Joshua, so I'm going to throw this out. But Joshua is a great study in the Bible. If you want to look to somebody for leadership, Joshua is a great start. So I'm going to pull this up from this is from Joshua chapter 5, and the example I was going to use was, man, I'm a bulldog, like a Georgia bulldog, through and through. I did my freshman year at the University of Alabama, and then I like to joke that I transferred to an accredited college and went to Georgia, but then Alabama whoops our tails every time we play them, so that makes me mad. But anyway, it's funny because when you watch a game that you really care a lot about, I find myself praying, God, please, just this one time, just one time, can we please beat Alabama? And and then it's one of these things of well, are there Christians that cheer for Alabama that are saying, God, please, this one time, let us beat Georgia? I'm sure there's somebody, how does that cancel out? And who is God really for? Right? Do you ever wonder that? I'm praying, man. Come on. I'm praying hard in this game. My prayers are yet to be answered. Well, they were answered. It was just with no. But anyway, so this actually is going to give some insight into that, but that's not where we're going. So this is Joshua chapter 5, and it starts down around verse 13. And it says this: Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" Which I inserted Bulldogs or Crimson Tide, but that's what he's asking. Are you for us or for our enemies? Neither, he replied, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. So there's your answer. I'm neither for you or against you. But the point in this is as I think about Joshua, one of the things that's really key for us to remember, we can get really wrapped up in our careers sometimes. And we can even come to events like this and we can think about skills and how am I going to go back and what tweak am I going to put on the program, or whatever it is that we're doing, the team I'm responsible for, the team I'm leading. And this is just a good reminder that our authority to lead comes from God. It does not come from you. It doesn't come from your performance. There's people in this group right here, somewhere in this room this big, I'm certain there is somebody that's thinking, I want to get to the next opportunity. And how do I manage that? I even heard some of that from the stage. It was hey, send your resume, but also get aggressive and figure out who knows who. And I'm not saying any of that's bad, but what I am saying is just a good reminder, it is still in God's authority that either happens or doesn't happen. And so it's kind of I asked one of my friends at work one time about it because I felt like he had been passed over for promotions, should have been him a long time ago. And I asked him about it, and he said, He said, it's not up to me. He said, God's got this, and if I am to be this position, it'll be because God makes that happen, and if not, it's because he's got a plan for it. So just remember, like we start feeling pretty good about what we do, just remember that authority to lead is given to us by God. The next thing is this, and I am curious, I'm gonna ask a couple of quick questions here. Just tell me, like, I'm assuming you guys spend a lot of time like in a gym or on a basketball court. Would that be accurate? Is that accurate? I'm not trying to be funny. I'm asking, like, that's like when you think, man, if I'm here, I am again, another, however many hours out of the day. Is that right? Like, where's the place that you spend the most time? Which basketball court? We're back to the participative part of the day. Like, somebody throw it out there. Like, does it have a name? Like, where? Somebody. At where?
Youngstown State University.
Youngstown State University. Does the practice gym that you spend the most time at, does it have like a name?
Stanball, yeah.
Okay, so that would be where you spend the most time. Okay, somebody else. Somebody. Eagle's Nest. Where else? Gates Gym. Somebody else. Come on, your facility's got a name. I know it does. Somebody else.
HHP.
HHP, is that what you, okay.
That's it, yep.
All right. One more.
Steve Lacey Fieldhouse.
Okay, I don't even know what you just said, but you named
Lacey Fieldhouse.
Steve Lacey Fieldhouse. That's perfect. So this is what I want you to do. That's my version of, going back to the photo, that's my version of like spending time in the jungle at night when everybody else is back at Fort Clayton asleep. You're up there hour after hour making it happen. So I want to encourage you to do this. Like when you think about God as the one that gives us authority to lead, and you think about what you've been entrusted with, I want you to also remember the words to Joshua from the commanders of the Lord army. And I just want you to think about doing this. This will depend on whether you got the guts to do this or not. But the next time you go back to that facility that you just named, I want you to just take off your shoes for the first couple of minutes. And I want you to walk around on the floor. I want you to feel it under your feet. And I want you to also recognize and acknowledge that you are standing on holy ground. It's not that we worship basketball, but that ground is the opportunity that God's given you to lead and to minister and to reach the men and women that have been entrusted to your care. And so I just want you to think about that. That is the authority that he has given you. And so take those first couple of minutes, like just when you go back, just get to like if you got to, show up, 10 minutes early, kick off your shoes and just walk around on the court. Because he said to Joshua, the commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so.